In this video we're going to talk about another fundamental aspect of cask ownership, and that is what you can call the whiskey inside your cask when you come to bottle it. Whenever you buy a cask, it's important to remember that the whiskey that's held inside it isn't going to stay in that cask forever. At some point it's got to be bottled. Casks evaporate on an average in Scotland at around 2% per annum off the bulk volume of the cask. So clearly if you left that cask forever, it would ultimately completely evaporate and there'd be nothing left in there. Or the ABV would drop below 40%, at which point it's not legally whiskey. So it's clear that at some point somebody is going to have to bottle your cask of whiskey, even if it's not you. Now, why naming rights are important? Because the buyer of the cask, if you're not the one bottling it, needs to know what they can call that whiskey. You may be thinking that all whiskey is the same, so all Macallan is Macallan, so what difference does it matter? Well, if you watch one of our other videos, we compared this bottle of 1937 37-year-old Macallan against this bottle of 1937 37-year-old Macallan. This bottle was an official bottling, bottled by Gordon MacPhail but released by the distillery in the 1970s, and this one is a rebottling of that exact same whiskey that was done as part of the Fine and Rare collection in the 2000s. Now this bottle makes about £3,000 to £3,500 at auction, and this bottle makes around £30,000 to £35,000 at auction, even though it's the same whiskey. So it's important here to understand that it's not just about the whiskey, it's about branding, and therefore whenever you start looking at branding, you need to start getting a comprehension of intellectual property and trademarks. If you're an owner of a cask then, you need to understand the trademark law, because that directly applies to what you can call the contents of your whiskey. So first of all, let's take a look on the laptop and see exactly what trademarks can be and what they can't be. So here we're jumping onto the British Library website. It's a fantastic resource and it covers a lot of things about trademarks that does so in a better way than the Intellectual Property Office, which is where we're going to look next. So on this article, bl.uk, it says the Intellectual Property Office outlines what you can and can't register as a trademark. Any new UK trademark must be unique and can include the following: words, sounds, logos, colours, or a combination of the above. So now we know that what you can trademark, let's take a look at how brand owners are using that. And in this video we're going to use the example of Highland Park, which, as many of you know, is owned by Edrington and produce some fantastic whiskies from the Orkney Islands. So if we go to the intellectual property website here, there's some quick links and you can see search for a trademark. So what you need to do is click search for a trademark, and then you will get three options. You can search for trademarks by the number, the owner, or the keyword or phrase or image, and in this instance we're going to look at the keyword. So now that we've clicked on the keyword, we can enter that trademark, and in this instance we're going to put in Highland Park. Now we need to search a few parameters here. We need to search for the exact wording Highland Park, and we also want live trademarks. Now trademarks can lapse or trademarks can change. So you can trademark an image, as we've just said, so you can, as companies' logos change, you will find that the trademark on their old logos lapse and it comes into effect with their new trademark. So with Highland Park, you can see they've got 3 registered trademarks, and these are affixed to different classes as well. So if we click on this top UK trademark here, it tells you the classes here under lists of goods, and class 33 for Highland Park is Scotch whisky and beverages included in class 33 containing Scotch whisky. And the overview of that trademark says simply the words Highland Park. So if you've bought a cask of Highland Park whisky, you may be thinking that you can call it Highland Park, but doing so would severely infringe Edrington's intellectual property, and you would find quite a big lawsuit coming your way if you tried to do that. So how does anyone else other than the distillery bottle whisky? Well, for this we need to take a look at the Trademarks Act of 1994, and the specific section that we're interested in today is section 11, which is the limits on effect of registered trademarks. So this is the limitations of trademarks. And the relevant section for you, if you're bottling a cask of whisky or looking to own a cask of whisky, it's section 11(2)(b). And I'm going to paraphrase it here, but we'll pull out the relevant words on the screen. A registered trademark is not infringed by, and then this is the important part, geographical origin, provided the use is in accordance with honest practices in industrial or commercial matters. So what the Trademark Act of 1994 says under section 11(2)(b, it says that you cannot trademark a geographical origin or a geographically factual statement. And this is how independent bottlers get around trademark issues, as we'll now see. So before we look at how an independent bottler negate the problems of trademarks, what is an independent bottler? Well, an independent bottler is technically anybody who is bottling a cask of whisky who isn't the distillery or brand owner. So it can be, in the purest sense, it can be someone whose business is to release bottles of whisky or bottle casks of whisky and release them to the public. But more and more so, you're seeing independent bottlers being casinos or hotels or bars or restaurants, and they all get around the trademark issue in the same way. Let's pick two bottles from the shelves here. So we've got an empty bottle here. Fantastic whiskey it was too. It's a Kalila 1969 that was bottled by Gordon and MacPhail. But you'll see here on the label, it says from the Kalila distillery, Islay. And this is a 1980s bottling, so this use has been going since the 1980s. And again, on this Chieftain's bottling of Glenougie, it says distilled at the Glenougie distillery. So what independent bottlers do, they use this geographical origin, like get out, to describe the contents of the whiskey. So although you can't say Kalila and infringe that trademark, you can say distilled at the Kalila distillery. There are certain uses and restraints with this that have got to do with the Scotch Whisky Association. For instance, the brand here, the Connoisseur's Choice, which is the Gordon and MacPhail line, the brand has always got to be more prominent, and that's much more evident now because this is a 1980s bottling. Remember, this is the 2000s bottling. The Chieftain's brand has got to be much bigger than the Glenougie brand here. So independent bottlers work by stating the geographical origin of the product. So they say distilled at the Macallan distillery, distilled at the Springbank distillery. Every independent bottling of Scotch single malt whisky will work in that way. So if you're buying a cask of whisky, how can you be sure exactly what you can call the whisky inside that cask? Well, it's really simple to do some due diligence, and there are three ways that you can do this. The first way is to check the contract and invoice that is being issued by the seller. Now, if you have been sold the cask as Highland Park, for instance, and the seller's talked about Highland Park, or another good example of this would be Bunnahabhain. Bunnahabhain is often sold as Stoisha, but if they were just telling you it's Stoisha in the sales pitch, you wouldn't know what it is, so they have to say Bunnahabhain. It's the same with Highland Park and Whitlaw. Check what they've described it. So in the sales pitch, if you've read Bunnahabhain, 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 and in the contract it says Stoisha, or it says Highland Park, Highland Park, Highland Park, and then they come to your contract and it says Orkney Malt, question that immediately. What rights do you have to call that whiskey? You might have been sold it as Highland Park or Bunnahabhain, but the reality is it might have to be bottled as Stoisha or Whitlaw or Orkney Malt, etc. So check the contract to see if the naming term on the contract correlates with the naming term that you've been pitched with. The second place to check is on the delivery order that is being sent to the warehouse. Now, if you've not watched our video about delivery orders, make sure you watch that video next, because a delivery order is the only way in which the cask will be transferred into your name and externalise the ownership of that cask. So why is a delivery order important? Well, it has to be addressed to the warehouse keeper where that cask is being stored, and it has to be signed by the buyer and the seller, but more importantly, you have to list the cask details. So let's say that you're buying a cask of Highland Park, and on the delivery order it says Orkney Malt. Then why is that correlation not right? If it was on your contract as Highland Park, then why is it as Orkney Malt on your delivery order? And there's an important reason for this. On a delivery order, the details that match that are sent to the warehouse keeper on the delivery order have to exactly match the details that are held with the warehouse. And the warehouse is an external party in all of this. You know, the seller is the one that's making the profit selling it to you. The warehouse is the person who's just taking the contract to store that whiskey for the long term. So the warehouse really doesn't have a vested interest. What they do have a vested interest in, though, is protecting their name and their reputation as a warehouse, because they're audited on a very regular basis by HMRC. Now, within a warehouse, or within anyone who's dealing in duty suspended goods, and especially the movement of duty suspended goods, there's a system called EMCS, which stands for the Excise Movement Control System. So when a cask is sent from one warehouse to another warehouse, the sending warehouse lists all the cask details, and the receiving warehouse lists all the cask details, and those two details have to sort of match and verify. And this is how HMRC keep track of your cask from it being created at the distillery, the whiskey being created at the distillery, probably moving through 3 or 4 different warehouses to its current warehouse where it is today. Now, if the details don't match the delivery order, so let's say that you get sent a delivery order that says Highland Park, but the EMCS, the official HMRC records, say that it's Orkney malt, the first thing that will happen is you'll get a call from the warehouse keeper to say, hang on a minute, these details don't match. So there's another sort of fail-safe there by checking your details on the delivery order. Now, the third and final place you can check is just directly with the warehouse themselves. So once you've got the cask into your name with the delivery order, you can call up the warehouse and double check, because the warehouse will have access to the EMCS system. So let's say that you've already bought a cask maybe 5 years ago and you want to double check what naming rights you have. Simple, call up the warehouse keeper and ask them what details they hold on the EMCS system about your cask. And points 2 and 3 are important because, like we've said, the warehouse are a neutral party in the sale of your cask. They're not making a profit, they're just doing the long-term storage. They can't falsify their records. They're audited monthly by HMRC. Now, the person selling the cask to you clearly has a vested interest in making that cask seem more attractive. And there have been numerous scams over the years where someone has bought a cask of whiskey as one thing, and in actual fact it turns out to be something completely different. And the only way that you can get around that is to double check. You check your contract, you check your delivery order, and you can also check with the warehouse that is holding the cask as well. So there you have it, a rather long-winded, I must admit, explanation of trademarks, how they apply to independently bottling whiskey, and how you can double check the naming rights. So in summary, you can check your contract and check that the name of the description of the whiskey matches the description that you were sold the whiskey under. Secondly, check the delivery order. And if the delivery order matches what you were sold it under, broadly speaking, you're absolutely fine. If points 1 and points 2 comply, then you're absolutely fine. If there's a discrepancy, however, on your delivery order, then that's maybe when you want to go and check with the warehouse that's holding the cask. We've got lots more guides about cask ownership on our YouTube channel, so make sure you check them out. And we've got lots more content like this coming this way soon, so make sure you subscribe.